Welcome to Charter Local Edition. I'm Tracy Young. July 17, 1944, two U.S. merchant ships exploded at the Port Chicago Naval Yard near Oakland, California. But joining us to talk about how this led to an integrated military and how it's impacted her personally is Dr. Raye Adkins. Nice to have you with us, Doctor.
Thank you for having me with you, Tracy.
When you and I were emailing and speaking before, I was so embarrassed that I grew up near this area and had absolutely no idea that this event had occurred. Is my experience unique, or have other people said the same thing to you? We didn't know about this.
Port Chicago is an untold story, an important story, but nevertheless an untold story.
So let's go back for a moment, and I'm going to say the easy stuff first here. Two vessels pull in. They are completely loaded with fuel. And men are there and they're loading torpedoes and bombs and ammunition, and they're in a hurry to load this because it's heading off to the Pacific. I mean, this is towards the end basically of World War II. Why was what happened there so controversial?
Well, first of all, the men were working under conditions that are just unheard of today. They had no training, they had no equipment. Most of the men working were African American men, so therefore of the 325 men killed, more than 200 of them were African American.
And those were enlisted men, and there were the officers. They weren't, from my understanding, they weren't doing any of the loading, but they weren't trained to assist the enlisted men that were doing the loading.
No one had training. There were no training manuals available, and so written at that time, to my knowledge. And so it was an accident waiting to happen, and it did.
And do we know exactly what happened, or unfortunately those who perished probably took with them what actual event happened?
It truly is an untold story, because if any story would reach the untold stories of mysteries unsolved, it would be Port Chicago. Wow. Because no one knows what happened that night.
But the bottom line is we lost hundreds of lives, and I think 390 were injured too, so a lot of people were also injured.
Lots of people injured, the town of Port Chicago destroyed. I understand the explosion was felt all the way to San Francisco.
Oh my goodness. Do you think they meant to cover it up, or do we also have to understand this in the context of what was happening in July of 1944?
Lots of things were going on. We're at war. Yeah. Lots of events were happening daily. I would hedge to say that it was a cover-up, but it was also a sign of the times. You have to remember we were in a Jim Crow era, and African American men had been lost, and the nation was outraged over it, but nevertheless, it occurred.
The one thing we can't overlook, though, was that right after it happened is that they were called, the enlisted men were called, and they were all African Americans, were called back to work and to clean up that yard, and some of them said no because they did not know what happened, and they were afraid to go back, and yet they were court-martialed, but some of the officers that chose not to go back, they were not court-martialed. Is my reading of the events correct?
Well, the men were, after picking up body parts, which they did, of their colleagues, the largest body part was a foot and a boot. Immediately after that, they were told to go back to Mare Island to continue the work. Mm-hmm. And they said no. And so from that, more than 200 were court-martialed, and 50 of those men were charged with mutiny. And those mutiny charges, unfortunately, still stand today.
And many of them went to prison for a long period of
time. And they did. They went to prison for it.
Let's go to the positive side of this for a moment, though. This did lead to an integrated military.
Yes. It led to an integrated military. It also led to manuals being written on safety and ammunition handling and training. So lots of things came out of that explosion. And oftentimes, unfortunately, it requires a loss of life for things to change.
Why is this event personal for you?
Well, it's personal for me because my father happened to be in that number that died that night. Mm-hmm. And he left my mother with an unborn child. Mm-hmm. And so I grew up my entire life understanding that something happened but did not know what.
All right. And out of that, she wrote a book called Letters to My Father, The Gifts. Our guest has been Dr. Raye Adkins. Thank you for reminding us about this tragedy, but the positive that came out of it. It's been an honor and a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity
for
so much.
Charter Local Edition, I'm Tracy Young.
California cable providers are making it possible for you to educate yourself by bringing you live gavel-to-gavel coverage of the three branches of state government. Watch your legislators, governor, and Supreme Court as they discuss and enact laws that affect your life, your family, and your profession. For politics and public affairs that shape California, watch the California Channel.